Hey, Adam, I am so excited that you and I found some time to carve out to talk today. I'm just so excited that we have the ability to really get into and dig into this topic of sales and what's wrong with modern selling and how it impacts businesses and really what they can do to change that reality. And so thank you for joining me. I guess the first real question that I have, my friend, is, what are the major issues when it comes to selling today?
Well, Ken, thanks for taking the time out to have this conversation. And you're absolutely right. It is really, really important that we talk about these sort of subjects, because I think that one of the most deprived areas is the business of selling. If you look at other areas that businesses consist of, what you find is that there's so much investment into knowledge, into developing and fine tuning it. But when it comes to the sales side of the business, that's neglected. So I'm really happy that we're having this conversation. What I would say is that the two main problems that we have right now in the world of selling. And the first one is this approach where it involves kind of this pressure, pitchy kind of approach, or it's also known as like the hard sell. And what shocks me is that so many businesses are using this in varying degrees, in varying forms. And putting aside that it's actually unethical to pressure a prospect, to teach your salespeople to almost bully someone into a close. Putting aside that this is unethical, it's actually really ineffective, really, really ineffective. And let me explain why. Well, if you talk to any salesperson and you ask them, have you watched The Wolf of Wall Street? Have you watched Boiler Room? They'll be like, yes, right? I've watched that. It's one of my best films. And no doubt you've watched it as well, Ken.
Yeah, Glenn Glenn Ross, man. I tell people about that all the time.
Exactly, exactly. Now, when salespeople, look at these films, and what they do is they get this type of archetype of what a salesperson should be like, how they should approach a prospect, what they should say and not say on the phone, right? And they're seeing they're seeing them as like role models. But what they fail to realize is not only are they watching it, are salespeople watching it, but everyone else in the world's watching it, right? And when you come on the phone and you come with this kind of pressure approach, like, hey, John, come on, you said you need to do this and let's do this right now. What's stopping you? This kind of a really, really sort of pushy approach. What happens is that the prospects, their resistance level goes sky high. They bring this barrier down, right? And the reason being is because they know what you're doing, right? They know, they've watched those movies. They've watched how these characters woo people and use pressure tactics on the phone to close deals, right? Now, I'm making a sort of a trivial point here, but there is a deeper problem. And the problem is this: prospects have evolved, but salespeople haven't. What do I mean by that? That prospects over the years being pitched to death with all the pressure tactics that's out there, they've become attuned to them. They've got the scar tissue, right? That they know what's coming, and they have got this resistance to to stop you try and use these techniques. So that's why it's ineffective, because it's so telegraphed and it's so in their face that they know what you're doing, and they're just going to shut down. They're not going to purchase from you. So it's very unsophisticated approach. It's very blunt and in your face, and ineffective. If I can give you an example, this is the sort of take action now and get a discount approach, where you're speaking to a prospect, you've got them all excited, and then you say, look, this program is 10K, right? You say this program is 10K, but if you purchase with me now, it's 5K. You suddenly drop the price down by a ridiculous amount. And you're saying, look, if you purchase it with me now, you get it at 5K discount. After this call, it's going back up to 10K. Now, there are so many things wrong with this, right? That we don't have the time to go through it. But the first thing is that do you really think that people fall for that? Do you really think that prospects are so stupid that they're going to believe that that's the case? And secondly, it also undermines you and your product. It undermines you because what you're saying is that you don't have the skills to persuade someone to buy the product at a normal rate. And the second is that if you're cheapening that product with a discount, what does that say about the content of your product, right? But there's lots of things, there's lots of examples like this that that prospects have come to know of them, and they know what you're doing and it doesn't work.
So, Adam, tell me a little bit more. Like it seems like what you're saying is if somebody, you know, is offering a product at a really steep discount, let's say, for action today, it sounds like what you're saying is that people know that either A, the product is not worth that higher price that you're asking, and B, that people are sophisticated to know that if they call you tomorrow and offer you 5 grand, you're likely to take it.
Precisely. They know these tricks. They're aware of it, that what you're trying to do is you're trying to coerce them into purchasing because they have a fear of loss. They know that you're doing that. And they know that if they call you tomorrow, they know, and you know that you're going to take their $5,000, that you're going to take the payment from them at the reduced rate the following day, even next week or even next month. They know that. And the other side of this is the psychology behind it, is as in perception. What messages are you putting out to the prospect by halving the cost of your program instantly, that in 2 minutes? It can't be perceived as valuable, can it? Right?
No.
So there's
Yeah.
absolutely, I mean, there's so many of these kind of tactics, and that are really, really unethical, but also ineffective.
So why do salespeople use them if they're ineffective? I mean, I can
Brilliant.
just hear the cacophony of salespeople crying out, but it works, it works.
Brilliant question, Ken. The problem is this, is that there will be some people, some prospects that will buy because you're using those tactics, those pressure tactics, right? So it becomes deceptive. It's very deceptive, because salespeople, what they like to do is they like to focus on what they've got, not what they've lost, right? Because and this is a problem, because salespeople don't indulge in critical introspection. That the sales industry, for whatever reason, does attract a lot of people with big egos, and they don't like to criticize themselves. So they always like to blame something else or blame others, or they don't look at the real problems, which is in terms of what they're doing, but they'll blame something else. And in this situation, what they will say is, well, look, it's working. I got such and such prospect on these days, and I generated this money. But what I say to these people is, it's not the ones that you get, it's the ones that you lose. The question is, how many of those people that you tried that pressure tactic were turned away by using such a technique on them, that would have bought? And also the people that did buy, how many of them would have bought if you knew what you were doing and you didn't use that kind of pressure tactic? So those are the questions that salespeople need to ask themselves. They want to get genuine answers.
So it's not enough to simply say, well, I'm making sales, so this works. Really, the issue is you don't know that you wouldn't be making those sales with any set of techniques. And you don't know what this is ultimately costing you. That's the real issue here.
Exactly. It could be costing you tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you are indulging in self-deception because you're thinking, well, I'm getting something at the end of the month. But the question is, what are you losing? That's the pertinent question.
Excellent. Well, what is the other, or what are other big issues as it relates to the sales industry as you understand it?
Well, the other problem is a reaction to what I've just described in terms of like the hard selling, using those pressure tactics. They're so disgusted by those tactics that they've gone the other end of the spectrum, which is also a problem as well. And it's a very kind of airy fairy, no sense of direction type of approach to selling. You probably heard it. You know, they describe it as to serve is to sell, or service is selling. You know, sometimes expressed in these terms. And this is a major problem. This is a major problem. And in my view, people who describe selling in these terms as a service or serving are people that really were never really good at selling. And I mean, they couldn't close the door, Ken, to be honest, let alone a prospect. And what they use is this as a way to mask their ineptness in selling. So, you know, typically you say to them, so, okay, so, you know, how did it go today? You know, how many calls did you make? How many sales did you get? They'll go, well, you know, I didn't get any sales, but, you know, I served someone today. You know, I made their day, you know, that kind of approach, right? But on a sort of more serious note, why is this also ineffective? You know, where we had the other approach which was very driven and target focused and very aggressive. You've got the other side, which is, you know, lack of direction. This almost this kind of feather in the wind kind of approach, right? The reason it's ineffective is to view selling as serving, as service, it undermines the position of the salesperson and ultimately undermines the ability to sell to someone.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, sure. So when you think of serving, Ken, what comes to your mind?
I don't know, like a beach cleanup or maybe a soup kitchen, something like that.
Like a waiter, for example, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So now what you have to understand, and not there's anything wrong in being a waiter because it serves a purpose, but a waiter and a customer, the relationship, the power relations are very different. The waiter has a lesser status than the client, right? They're there to take instruction and to serve. But when you think about salespeople, their whole existence is to influence the prospect because they're seen as someone who has information or knowledge that can help them. But in order to influence someone, you have to have an equal or greater status, right?
Yeah.
Like think of the relationship between a student and a professor. A professor has a higher status because of the knowledge that they have. The student has a lesser status, right? And that relationship, the dynamics of that relationship is very different to, let's say, what we just described, you know, the waiter and the client. Very different relationship. So when you describe sales as service, what you're doing is that you're lessening the status of the salesperson below the prospect.
So Adam, it sounds like what you're saying is that whether someone is a overbearing, pushy salesperson, or whether they're kind of more of a, you know, doormat type of a salesperson, that both of those are fundamentally misunderstandings of what selling is.
Yeah.
And so if that's going on in my organization, or I am the cause of that, how do I fix that? How does a company, you know, or a person change their mind around these misconceptions?
Well, one needs to redefine their understanding of what selling is, because that's the key. If you understand that, if you can unlock that, then that deals with most of the problems, and that approach will filter through all of the sales process, and it will harmonize all of these problems that you're encountering and involving, you know, upsetting prospects or not getting any sales if you're using the sales as a service approach, for example. So what ultimately we need to do within the sales industry is to become more sophisticated. You know, earlier I spoke about how advanced the marketing industry has become. There are a plethora of experts out there, methods that are really sophisticated. And we look at the sales industry and it's almost sort of fossilized. We're still using the same things that we did and said 20 years ago. But as I described earlier, that prospects have evolved. They've caught up They know what's going on, right? So what we have to do is create a sophisticated approach to selling and understanding that selling is about changing behavior. It is not about your product. It is not about becoming their friend and serving them, but changing behavior. And how do people change their behavior? When they feel good about making decisions that drive behavior. Now, if we understand sales in that way, that deals with most of the problems.
Yeah. How does one start to kind of get on that journey of changing how they perceive what selling is? Like, what's the first step that you would recommend to somebody who's maybe either on the overbearing side or on the selling as a service side?
I teach this. This is part of my training that sales, in order to get someone to buy, it has to be done in incremental steps. Because ultimately, what you're doing is, as I described earlier, you're changing their behavior. And change, for it to happen without resistance, has to be done in subtle ways and persuasion and by implication. So when I teach my inverse selling, which we've had lots of discussions about, um, when I teach it, I explain to my salespeople that what inverse selling is that it mimics how human beings make decisions. Like all of the steps that are needed in order for a human being to make a decision. So if your sales process does the same, then you don't have to use pressure tactics. You don't have to bully the person into purchasing your product because it's a natural outcome of the process. And you don't have to completely redefine sales as serving them so that you end up with lots of nice conversations but no sales, right? Because you're not engaging in resistance by lowering the status of a salesperson. You're basically not met with resistance. It's because you're working with the thinking process of the prospect.
Interesting. Is that kind of along the lines of this idea of, you know, gradually answering the questions that they have as they come about, or pre-answering those questions?
In fact, it's them answering your questions. You are asking, so uh, the way that I explain what the way that I understand sales to be is opening up pathways in the mind of the prospect to your offering. So opening up pathways in the mind of the prospect to your offering. And the engine that drives that is well-crafted questions. So
Okay.
you're asking questions, and what you're doing is that you're opening up their consciousness, you're opening up their mind to your offering, which then leads them to buy.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate you kind of walking me through some of this. Is there anything else that the average salesperson really should think about when it comes to kind of these two extremes? And is there anything else that you would say, hey, this is the thing in the industry we need to change?
We need our companies that have sales departments to take selling seriously, right? They need to understand that this is a profession and this is a skill, and it is not it is not um, a profession that someone takes up because they were rubbish at everything else. Selling is a profession and expertise in and of itself, right? And sales companies need to invest in their salespeople so they can up their game, and that we don't follow phrases like always be closing, stuff like this, uh, learning sales techniques from the office or the Wolf of Wall Street or the boiler room, that we really do invest in our developing our skills of our salespeople.
Excellent. Well, hey, thank you so much for your time today. This has been super valuable for me, and I'm looking forward to see how we can apply this to our company.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you for having me.